Mr. Redwood, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let me ask you, because you've seen it play out, and so have we around the world as the live session was broadcast, things seem to be descending into some crisis, and many fear for the sanctity of Britain's, yes, unwritten, but nonetheless, ancient constitution. What do you have to say to that?
I would say we've got a robust democracy, and we're still pursuing a very tired and old set of arguments. We thought we'd resolved all this by holding a referendum of all the United Kingdom voters 3 years ago, and the then Parliament and then government said to the people, you will make the decision and the future Parliament will get on and implement your choice. And now we have a stubborn group of MPs in this Parliament who, having stood for election on that ticket, have now torn it all up and said they want to try and stop Brexit altogether, or they want to stop Brexit on the terms that are available. And so, yes, we're having a very lively set of exchanges. We do, of course, have our constitution written down in many important documents, and not all of them are old. And we're seeing that the rebel side against the government is trying to flex and change our constitution in ways that suit them.
Okay, so let's take this little bit by bit. But first I want to ask you what you believe is going to be the next step. There's obviously going to be a big vote. What are we going to see, do you think? Will the Prime Minister call for an election if the vote goes against him, the next vote in Parliament?
I really can't tell you because, as you rightly reported, we now have a very balanced Parliament where no one clearly has a permanent majority. The government still commands more support than any other grouping within the Parliament, but the government can't always carry its business, so it makes it extremely difficult to predict. What is very clear is that what the government decided to do is far from unusual. We always have 3 weeks off from Parliament in the second half of September into October, because that's the time when our different political parties have their big conferences and the members of Parliament want to attend those and not have to come back to Parliament to vote. So that is quite normal. And then the other thing a new Prime Minister wishing to lead a new government wanted to do was to hold a Queen's speech. That's the occasion in Parliament when the government, through the speech from the Crown, lays out its programme for the year ahead. And that again is something which Boris Johnson quite rightly decided he needed to do. Okay. And that will afford Parliament plenty of debating time. 3 or 4 weeks are available for debating Brexit if they want to do it all over again. But your viewers should know that I'm afraid the British Parliament hasn't done anything other than talk about Brexit for 3 years. So it's a bit difficult to know what new arguments they want to bring forward.
I know that you and your side say that this is all very normal, and of course it is legal. As you pointed out, the new Prime Minister has that right. However, constitutional historians point out that such a long suspension of some 5 weeks has not happened since 1930. That's nearly 100 years ago. It also has not happened in a situation where there's such a massive, as you just described, unresolved political drama and the biggest constitutional change in some 40 years of British history. So it's not that normal. But more to the point, I want to ask you a couple of questions, because the Prime Minister says that he cannot have this vote to take no deal off the table because he must have the negotiating room with Brussels. However, there seems to be no new British proposals, despite the Prime Minister's emissaries going to Brussels, no new proposals, no new negotiations, nothing happening in those negotiations. So I want to ask you, like the MPs did over and over again today, what is your alternative to the things that have held up a deal? For instance, the backstop. What have you put forth? What can we expect?
Well, the government's put forward plenty of ideas through their discussions with individual member states and through their negotiator going to Brussels again. And the Prime Minister sketched some of those again in his remarks today for those MPs who could be bothered to listen to him. My side doesn't really believe there is an issue with the Irish border. The Irish border at the moment is a currency border, an excise tax border, a value-added sales tax border. There are different rates and different incidences on each side of the border, and the goods flow across perfectly freely, and the amounts are adjusted electronically, and computer settlement and bank settlement. You don't need to have physical barriers at the border with people working the sums out when the lorry turns up. And so if we need tariffs as well, which we might do if we just leave, there'll be tariffs on food, for example, those too could be handled in the same way that VAT and excise is handled at the moment. So my side of the argument thinks it's an entirely synthetic issue made up by people who are determined to prevent the United Kingdom leaving the European Union.
Mm-hmm. But Mr. Redwood, your side thinks it's synthetic. You keep, saying the same things about Project Fear, but there are real sort of hard and fast dollar and cents facts that have happened. Since Brexit, the pound has lost 20% of its value. Since all of this Brexit referendum, rather, investors have taken tens of billions of dollars, or rather pounds, of equities out of the UK, and there is a shrinking of the economy. And many are saying that you're not looking to the long term, and there is potentially a huge amount more financial damage ahead. But I want to ask you this, because I know you actually don't agree with that.
But simply not true. None of those things are true.
It is true that the pound has lost its value.
The stock market is up quite a lot. Stock market is up quite a lot. Employment is up. The economy has grown since the vote. All the things they said would happen that were negative, job losses, a recession, did not occur, just as some of us predicted.
Well, it hasn't actually happened, Brexit, yet, but the pound has lost its value against the dollar, and the Bank of England is talking about a possible recession around the corner.
A lot of currencies have gone down against the dollar.
Okay, let me ask you this, though,
and the dollar has been very strong because you're offering higher interest rates than anybody else, and I understand that, but that's been a general phenomenon of a strong dollar.
In 2016, just before the referendum, you wrote something that may now actually be coming back to sort of, to roost. You said the reason so many conservative Eurosceptics have campaigned for a referendum and are now campaigning to leave is that we see Europe as a rare issue that transcends party politics. To us, it is more important than which party wins the next election or who is the Prime Minister. So people are now asking, is Brexit and leaving, deal or no deal, more important than the democratic process and the parliamentary process? And is it also more important to you, as some in the Conservative Party have suggested, than the unity of the British government? You know that there's talk about what might happen to Scotland, another vote of independence, what might happen to Ireland, potential eventual reunification. Are you still that committed to Brexit at the expense of all else?
Well, first of all, it's a completely democratic process being thwarted by an undemocratic parliament, which is the irony of the situation. Parliament said the people must decide, we will do what they decided to do, and now the parliament is trying to thwart the people. So we see on our side it being very democratic. We had a general election after the referendum vote, and both the main parties in the country that between them attracted 82% of the votes in that election. Both promised to see through Brexit, but then one of them, the Labour Party, has more or less reneged on that promise. So as to my prediction, I think my predictions are very accurate. I said that this is an issue which transcends party loyalties, and we've seen in the Conservative Party quite a few Conservative colleagues who've decided to join another party or to leave the Conservative Party over their views on Brexit, and we've seen in the Labour Party quite a few people defect, partly on the European issue and partly over the leadership generally of the party. But yes, this is an issue which quite a lot of people think is more important than their party allegiance.
And let me just ask you then finally, because you just brought it up before I turn to historian Margaret Macmillan. What's happened is that the Prime Minister and his allies have threatened to, quote, deselect Tory MPs, your own party MPs, if they vote against a no-deal Brexit. I mean, deselect means costing them their job. They won't be allowed to stand for another election. Is that democratic? Many say it smacks of the word purges, and you know where that comes from the old Soviet years of the Cold War. Is that democratic, these deselection threats?
Well, I haven't seen or heard that in public. There are unattributable briefings along those lines. My view on all this is that it is usually a very rare event that somebody needs to have the whip taken away from them because of their behaviour and their attitudes, and it's not something to be encouraged. I always hope these things can be sorted out by friendly and strong discussion within the party.
On that note, MP John Redwood, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Westminster tonight.